Hey there, folks. I am today working on building a composite image in Photoshop. I've been working with Photoshop for a really long time, so I'm just going to introduce you to, pretty straightforward way of working with Photoshop to build an image, to kind of pull multiple spaces together into one image to make it seem like it kind of fits together in an interesting way. So I am glad you're here to join me, and let's get started.
Hey, this is Melissa Furness, and today we're going to create a composite image in Photoshop. So I'm going to start off right away and work on researching some ideas. Super important that you think about the concept and what's behind the work. So with my work, I've been dealing with kind of garden weeds, and so I'm kind of looking at some interesting qualities about what I might want to express with that. So you can do like an online search, find some interesting articles. This might be one that I would want to take a look at, and maybe, considering the origins of like how did we start to define weeds and what they become for us in a garden, what they kind of mean to us, and what I might do with that in terms of my own imagery. And then from there, the next thing you want to do is gather some images. So in Google, you want to do a Google search. Ideally, you'd want to take your own photos. You can even take images from anywhere, but there's a good way to do a Google image search. So you can choose to do a search, go to your images, and you see under those tools that I selected large. So it's important that you get a quality image as large as you can, scroll through, and find ones that are interesting and that also support your ideas that you researched. So what I'm doing here is looking through and seeing what I can find, trying to find the highest quality image that I can. So when you click on the image, don't just drag it from that Google search, actually go to the website to get the highest quality and go and press Control and click on the image and click Save the image. And then you'll be able to navigate to where you're going to put it on your desktop and save it there, and that's going to give you the highest quality image if you do it that way. If you're just kind of dragging from that Google search area, that's going to be a lower quality image. So make sure that you do click on that website and grab it from there and hold down the control key and click on that image to save it on your desktop. So here's the images that I came up with. I found about 4 to start with, and what I'm going to do is then start to think about how I'm going to pull it into Photoshop. So the next step would be to open up Photoshop and then start to create a new document. So you want to make one that's going to be 16 by 20 inches or 20 by 16 inches. Make sure that it's 300 dpi there and that it's CMYK mode. So you can see me changing that here before I even get started in Photoshop. So double check that and then hit create. And so then you have a kind of basically a white empty canvas, and you can start to build your composite image from there with the images that you gathered. So you want to choose then, maybe kind of like a background image. This environment, I think I want to use these kind of bricks on the one side and maybe not that guy on the other side, but I'm going to grab those bricks, drag them and copy and paste them over to my empty kind of space there and see how large it is. Pretty small, so I'm going to scale it up. So under transform you have scale. I can pull that out and drag that image outward, but what that's going to do is I'm going to lose some quality as I'm doing that, and I'll show you that here closely as I get that completed. So there are certain strategies that I learned in order to improve an image quality. So when I zoom in, or if you zoom in on an image that you've scaled up in this way, you'll start to notice that it has some kind of strange edges or pixelated areas that don't look so great, because what the computer is doing is trying to come up with information where there is none. So it's just kind of interpolating that information. So you're going to see those sort of strange edges. Sometimes you'll see like a glow, you'll see boxes like pixelation, things like that. So what we're going to do is then try to make that image better. So There's several steps that you can take to do that. So the first one would be create a Gaussian blur. So under your filter menu, go to blur and choose Gaussian blur. See, that's a really big blur. Obviously, we don't want that. But we want to slightly blur that image so that it removes some of that pixelation to start with. So I'm going to be careful about how I do it. Maybe 1, 2, 3 pixels, not more than that. But what it's going to do is to get rid of some of those sort of strange qualities that you see in the image when you look closely. So once you've decided on that, just hit OK. Slightly blurry image and it looks a little bit better. And the next step is to do something called add noise. So this is under your filter menu. Go to filter, noise, and add noise. You'll get a menu that appears. And what this will do is allow you to add kind of a grain that's like the film grain if you would actually photographed an image. So you see what that looks like if I put a lot in versus if I put a little. So putting just a little bit of that film grain in is going to do two things. It's going to hide those pixelated, weird looking edges that I don't want visible in my printed image. And it's also going to kind of make that photograph look a little bit more like a film negative printed photograph, and will kind of hide the fact that maybe I was taking a poor quality image and scaling it up. So it's a great tool to be able to use. It adds a little bit of that grain. So play around with that tool until you get the effect that you want and hit OK. And then after that, the final step you want to do is to resharpen that image using the unsharp mask tool. So this is also under the filter menu. So go up there, go to so sharpen, unsharp mask, and then you'll see this window appear, and you have different aspects of how you can sharpen the image. So the amount, the radius, and the threshold. The radius is important here because if we have a very small radius, we're just going to end up sharpening up those same pixelated areas that we wanted to get rid of. So we want to make our radius large, and then play around with the sliders to see how much of an amount you want to sharpen. So having the larger radius is going to allow us to just sharpen those outer, more important edges, and create a sharper looking quality image. And after that, we would have gotten rid of those really strange edges that we don't want to see on there. So it takes a little bit of time to get used to some of these tools, so I encourage you to play around, see what happens if you do like a really huge amount versus a little amount, and then try to create a balance that's going to give you the best quality image in the end. So now I'm going to work on creating selections. So I have these individual elements that I have in Photoshop, and I want to extract them from their environment so then I can place them into my own environment. So there's a lot of different ways to create selections in Photoshop, but that's what Photoshop is all about, is making selections. So what we're going to do is try out as many different ways as we can. So there's some pretty basic ones. First off, in the tool palette, you have the second tool down, which is a selection tool, a regular, rectangular, elliptical, marquee tool. And then the next one down is a lasso tool, where you can just kind of freehand draw that selection out and make it what you want. And then just hit the delete key and it'll just remove that area. What we also want to do is to make that element floating. So I'm copying and pasting that entire image onto a new layer, and then I'm just going to remove the background by just hitting delete and making it like white paper so that I can copy and paste the floating image onto my composite image. So there's the lasso tool. I'm just deleting elements freehand. This can be somewhat laborious. It's not so easy to control, obviously. So you could also use the polygonal lasso tool, which will allow you to do just straight lines. Also easy way to create a selection, but doesn't give you exact edges necessarily, because it's hard to draw them all. But there's things to play around with for certain. So see how that might work depending on the image that you have. And then there's also the magnetic lasso tool. So what Photoshop will do is to recognize a difference in a color on an edge of something you're drawing. So if you kind of roughly go along that edge, it'll try to find that for you. As you can see, I'm not absolutely perfect at that, but if you have a little bit more steady hand, you can actually get it to find that edge for you. So you might find that that's the way you want to go. It could be easier depending on the type of image. You know, I have a little bit of a strange background with this one, so it might not be so easy to do, but that tool is available there for you to create a selection, and then just hit delete and you can remove that background. The main tool that actually I like to use, there's the magic wand tool, which I'll show you in a little bit. You know, the magic wand tool is best for an image that's high contrast. So you can see there I'm just trying to select, you know, the dirt, but it's not giving me a clean selection. So with one of my other objects, I will show you how that can work a little bit better. But for this particular image that has kind of a strange background, I find that creating a path using the pen tool is the most useful for me. So what I can do is plot out individual points using the pen tool. The pen tool exists in Illustrator, InDesign, other Adobe software, so getting a handle of it on it is helpful. So you click once to create a straight line, you click and drag to create a curve. So you can zoom in onto your image and create, you know, the exact edge that you want to, in order to extract it from its environment or its background. You know, this was something I used a long time ago. I was an advertising intern and I had to do a catalog for refrigerators and outline 1 million refrigerators and put drop shadows in using this pen tool. So the important thing with creating a path, you're just making a shape like you would in Illustrator, and you have to make sure you close that shape in order to turn it into a selection. So under the paths palette, if you don't see it, it's under your menus in Photoshop. There's some icons at the bottom, and there's one that has like a circle with a dotted line that will turn it into a selection for you. With these images, you can certainly do multiple ways of creating selections. Here's some of my other images. This one, I'd probably use a pen tool, combination of selections. But I wanted to show you this one again because this one has more of an isolated background where you can use the magic wand tool. This is really great because you can just really quickly and easily select that outer area in a very clean way because it's a different color, and then just immediately, you know, delete it and extract that object from its environment. So that works really well, mostly for a high contrast image or an image that's already isolated in a photograph. So now another way of creating you know, a selection is to do select color range. So that's under the select menu. You choose color range, and maybe I want to like try to select the brown dirt to get rid of that a little bit more quickly instead of having to use the pen tool. This might not work as cleanly as I would like. But you might like, I don't know, the textured quality that leaves behind. But you have this palette where it shows you, you know, the black and white image. The white area is the area that's being selected. And so you see that I've completed that here. And then you have these flashing lines, which you can choose to hide or not. But you can also use the other selection tools to remove areas that you don't want to, you know, in the selection. By holding down the option key, you'll see a little minus that shows up next to like the lasso tool or the polygonal selection tool. And then you can remove that portion of the selection. Like I wanted to keep that, you know, part of the tool in there so that it wouldn't get deleted when I hit delete on that selection tool. And so that's what I'm doing, is holding down the option key and then just removing some areas from that current selection that I have there. And then when I've got what I want, then I can just go ahead and delete the white of that image. Or sorry, when I'm ready, I can go ahead and delete the brown, you know, kind of soil in that image to try to extract that object from its environment further. And there you can see the result of it. It's not perfect, but then, you know, after that I can also go back and use a combination of the other tools. You always have the eraser tool, which I haven't covered as much because that's pretty straightforward. But I can also do the magic wand to isolate a few other elements. I can use that kind of lasso tool as well, and go back and just clean up my selection to extract it further, which is really helpful. So most artists are going to be using like a number of different selection tools to get the effect that they want, particularly in a composite image like this. The next step is to bring all of these images together on top of your environment that we established earlier. So we have each photo element in separate files, and we have them floating, and basically want to copy and paste them over. So a great way to create a selection in Photoshop is to take, the selection tool and hover it over your layer, and you hold down the Option key, and you see a little dotted line appear next to the little finger, and that will allow you to load that layer as a selection. So I do that, and then I can press Command C to copy, and then I can just go over to my environment and paste that element in. So I can do that for each individual photo element that I'm including in this file. I can always add things later. I can maybe increase the size. So I'm going to edit and transform, scale it up a little bit, and then work on bringing each individual object that I've extracted into my composite and start to see how it looks. So, think about how you're building things as you go as well. So here's my second image, and copying and pasting it over as well. And you see how that's coming in. I think I might, increase the size of that image also a little bit, and then I'll think about how I'm going to arrange them as I get these things in there. And I can also transform and angle any kind of image. You can distort it, do anything that you want. Once you get them all in on your environment, you get a much better understanding of how things are going to start to come together. And since I have these floating, I can create multiples and do lots of crazy things with the environment as I would like. So here's my image. I've got those different elements coming in, but I'm sort of feeling like, the background's a little bit boring. So I think I'm going to kind of search for something else to add into the environment. So I think I'll switch over to checking out Google to see what else I can find that might add some visual interest to this. So I think maybe like, something to contrast, the bricks, maybe like a dead garden. That might be kind of cool looking. So I'm going to grab an image that hopefully is going to be decent quality from online. Make sure that it's large size there, and always click all the way to the source like I had done before. Pull that over, and then see if I can create a little bit more variety in that environment background beyond where the objects are. And so I'm going to take a little bit of time and just kind of manipulate that, and then also at the same time show you some different ways to adjust your image. So with this one, I'll kind of scale it up first, and then there's a lot of really great tools that allow you to kind of shift your color in subtle and dramatic ways. So oftentimes, like if I'm using like a regular photograph, I'll play around with shadows and highlights. So you might have one area that's maybe too dark, or one area where the whites are blown out. And so the shadows and highlights tool is very useful because it's going to allow you to try to draw out detail from the shadows that you can't see, or add in some elements in the sort of blown out bright areas to help you kind of make that image much more interesting looking than maybe it was when it was originally taken. So you can see here the darker areas have lightened up quite a bit when I did that, and then I darken in the highlights a bit, and you can really make some dramatic adjustments to an image to make it look a lot more interesting. So you can see the changes as I'm testing that out there. So play around with the tool. This one gives you a lot of control. Again, these sliders allow you to change the radius, change the amount of what's happening and how you're affecting that image. So try to get a handle on some of those controls and how you can manipulate your images to your best ability. So if I'm pretty happy with that, then I also want to kind of see what I can do to make this image that I brought in there have a little bit different value. So you have curves, which the curves menu is there where you can adjust your individual levels, your individual kind of layers. You've got a CMYK image. So you can adjust just the cyan elements in the image. So sometimes when I take a photograph, if it's under a yellow lighting, I'll want to reduce that yellow to try to neutralize the color in the image a bit more, or add a little bit of blue, which is really helpful. So those are kind of some subtle things that you can do. I use that with just trying to get a good quality image of my own artwork. But, with the composite image, you can do wild stuff with color, obviously. So with this background element, I do want to also affect that selection. I don't want just like a rectangular box. So I'm going to go back to some of my selection tools and try to work on cutting out different parts of that image so that it has more variation. So just in the essence of time, doing it quickly, I think I'm going to use just the lasso tool, some basic things just to move forward with my image so I can show you the rest of what we'll be working on. Trying to cut out that window, it's not very exciting, and a little bit of that brick and some of those other background elements that I don't really want in my final composite image. So putting these weeds in there is going to make things quite a bit more dynamic and interesting looking as I proceed. So I'm going to, just kind of change the scale, maybe rotate those elements, to try to, put that in a location where it feels like it's going to fit, maybe to create a little bit of a surreal quality to it along maybe the edge of some of that brickwork or construction work there. Also then, putting those layers back forward of those other elements I was including and thinking about their arrangement and maybe multiplying some of them, copying, pasting them over, and also adjusting their values. Here I have levels again, where I'm, affecting, the values of those individual elements that I've added on to that. Adjusting color of those individual elements. Copying and pasting, rotating, things like that until I come up with a full dynamic composition. So you can see how you can flip an image horizontally under the transform menu. And so I can, add in lots of different things. This image is building up in a really interesting way, so you can see me doing a lot of different things at this point. This is kind of the more fun stage of the piece, where I can play around quite a bit and decide on things. So next we want to adjust hue and saturation. This is a really pretty basic tool where you just use sliders to, adjust the overall color of a layer or an element that you have in there. It's pretty easy to use. Allows you to very quickly see what a color might look like throughout an image. So it's pretty simple to get a handle on. Another one is color balance. This might be more useful for maybe like those weeds I added in. With color balance, you have a lot more control, so you can really selectively choose, which areas of color you're affecting. You can also switch the underlying color of either midtones, shadows, or highlights. So this can allow you to kind of adjust the tone of the color much more selectively in a controlled way that you would like. So that can be really helpful as well. So I tend to go back and forth on playing around with these different types of color changes. I have all those different elements on this composite image. So I'm using color to actually really help quite a bit to bring together the image in an unusual way. It can be used to help contrast certain elements. It can be used to help pull them together to make them mesh and look like they belong together in an image, even if the image is kind of surreal like this one. Play around, see what you can do with color, make it really interesting in terms of a composite image, and I think you'll find some fascinating results in the end. Another adjustment you can make is with color range. So you can certainly, what I like to do is like I pull different elements that are similar together, and I'm going to affect the color together. So I'm choosing the color range. I want to maybe isolate the green in these weeds that you have here and see what I can do to kind of shift that color to make it maybe a little bit more in line with the other colors that I have going on in the composition. So once I have that selection created, I can then, change the hue and saturation of that particular selection, make it a little bit different, and get it to see how it can be feeling like it might fit in that space a little bit better, maybe with some reds there. And then when I'm happy with that, I'll hit OK. I can also change the lightness, saturation at the same time. So I'll keep fiddling with that image. This bell jar seems a little bit like it's sticking out much. So I want to also do a color selection to maybe select that wider area and see if I can darken it up a bit so it fits better in that space. So I'm doing a color range selection and just choosing that light area, and then I'm going to then darken that light bit. That looks a little bit better. And then from there, let's see what else I can do to kind of finish up the image. You can also feather a selection. You can also create selections once the image is all together. So what I could do is maybe later on, decide that I want to maybe change the color of maybe that central area there. So I'll grab the lasso tool and draw kind of a free-form shape in whatever area that I want, as you can see here. Then I'll go to the select menu and choose modify and feather. And I can choose a large radius so that the edges aren't so visible. And then I can, from there, change the color or value or anything else I want to change. So here I want to change the color in that central area a little bit, create some variety, can lighten it or darken it as well until I get the effect that I want. And then when I'm most happy with the image, I can decide, hey, that's good, I'm going to flatten it. And so I have just a background, and don't forget to save it. Other things you can do while it's flattened is using the clone stamp tool. It's a really handy tool where I can take one part of an image and basically paste it into another using kind of a paintbrush. So if you hold down the Option key, it will give you like a little kind of like target to it, and then you'll be able to target one area and paste it into another. So that's what you see here, that little target shape. I'm going to paste that dandelion into another part of the image. So this is really cool. It actually is the way that they remove blemishes from models and magazines and stuff, or a way that they actually try to remove something that's unwanted in an image. But here as an artist, we can play around with it and do whatever we like. See what we can do to kind of mix up the image, make it unique looking as much as possible, and then eventually decide that we're just about finished with the image, And you can even, paint and draw as well. You don't have to use only these tools. You could add individual hand-drawn, painted, and elements to the image that you're creating as well. So there's so much more that you can do with Photoshop, obviously, but this is at least an introduction to creating a composite image. So don't forget to then save your image. This is going to be a JPEG. We're going to save it as CMYK since we're going to print it out large scale, and then we'll call it finished. Nice work.